So let me tell you a story. A man publishes something that angers the head of state. He's called a liar, a threat. He's followed, watched, subpoenaed. He's accused of treason. Now, stop me if you've heard this one before. Is it Moscow, 1972? Beijing, 1989? Or Washington, last week? When power decides that truth is inconvenient, the truth doesn't vanish overnight. It gets smudged. It gets bent. It gets silenced. And freedom of the press, the thing we say we cherish in every high school civics class, isn't ripped away in one big dramatic moment. It's chipped. Like drywall in a water-damaged house. The damage is slow and quiet. By the time anyone looks, the foundation is already rotting. In this episode, I want to pull back that drywall. Because if you want to save the house, you have to expose the rot. Hello and welcome to another episode of Your Neighbor on the Left, a podcast where we talk about liberal politics, human decency, and life on the blue side of America's ideological divide. My name is Don Spielis, your bibliophilic host, and the subject for today's episode is Authoritarian Creep, how freedom of the press is being eroded. Now, we all like to talk about the Founding Fathers. I hear so many references to them these days. And none of the Founding Fathers is any more famous than Thomas Jefferson, who was a gigantic fan of free press. Let me read you just a few quotes of his on the subject. Our liberty depends on the freedom of the press, and that cannot be limited without being lost. In another one, he said, the only security of all is in a free press. And he said, if a nation expects to be ignorant and free in a state of civilization, it expects what never was and never will be. And just in case there are any of my conservative friends out there listening, I want to mention another quote from Ronald Reagan. There is no more essential ingredient than a free, strong, and independent press to our continued success in what the Founding Fathers called our noble experiment in self-government. And I think I would be safe in saying that most folks agree that there should be a free press in our country. Where the divide comes in is when you ask people to describe what exactly that means. So today we're going to talk a little bit about the concept of free press, the ways in which it is compromised, and the ways in which it seems these days there is an effort to curb it. But before we get to that, let's look at a few hot topics. All right, so of course it's July of 2025. Donald Trump is back in the White House. Tulsi Gabbard, the one-time Democrat, two-time CPAC speaker, and longtime Vladimir Putin apologist, is now Director of National Intelligence. If that sentence isn't crazy enough for you, this week she stood behind a podium at the DNI's headquarters and said that the Obama administration orchestrated a corrupt, politically motivated investigation into Donald Trump during the 2016 election. This particular argument is not new. It's never been proven to be true. But one thing I can say about it this time is that it is awfully convenient, especially when the Trump administration is feeling the heat, not just from Democrats, but from sunlight itself, the kind that might soon shine on the full unredacted Epstein files. Fingers crossed. And so just as the press starts to ask, why are these documents still sealed? Tulsi Gabbard asks, but what about Obama? It's deflection, which is not new. The question is it distortion? And it's coming from the top of the intelligence community. So on July 15th, Tulsi Gabbard stood before reporters and delivered what can only be described as a partisan sermon dressed in national security drag. She accused the Obama administration of launching a coordinated disinformation campaign in 2016 to kneecap Donald Trump's candidacy. She referred to the Russia probe as, quote, a political weapon masquerading as counterintelligence, end quote. It wasn't an offhand comment. This was a prepared address complete with newly declassified documents and carefully clipped sound bites. Now let's be crystal clear. Tulsi Gabbard, the person currently overseeing the entire U.S. intelligence apparatus, is using that platform not to warn us about threats to our democracy, but to go and rewrite history in service of the man currently occupying the Oval Office. And she's doing it at a moment when that Oval Office is under fire, not just from political enemies, and not from enemies foreign and domestic in general, but from its own party in many cases, and over a still unanswered question that makes every elite in D.C. squirm. Who was on Jeffrey Epstein's client list, and why won't the Trump administration let us see the documents? Now, it doesn't take a master chess player to see the move. The pressure is building on the White House over its failure to release the full Epstein files. Legal analysts, journalists, even a handful of Republicans are asking why the names are still blacked out. Public trust is eroding, online noise machines spinning, and Tulsi Gabbard, who until recently was best known for defending Bashar al-Assad and going on Tucker Carlson's podcast, decides now is the time to relitigate 2016. Why? Well, because it works. When the facts get uncomfortable, the playbook says, reach back, find an old villain, shout deep state, drag Obama back onto stage like it's 2010 and you're running a midterm ad. But this isn't some backbencher doing damage control. This is the Director of National Intelligence. And that matters because Tulsi Gabbard now has access to every classified file, every surveillance program, every global source. And she's using that power not to inform the public, but to support a narrative that's already been investigated, debunked, and laid to rest. Or at least it had been. Before she became DNI, Tulsi Gabbard had already spent years on a political transformation tour, from rising Democratic star in the early 2010s to Assad apologist in 2017, to CPAC speaker in 2022, to full-time MAGA ally by the 2024 election. Her resume includes multiple appearances on Russian state media outlets, speaking engagements at right-wing conferences, blasting the woke military, while simultaneously demanding loyalty to Commander Trump, and, most notably, leaving the Democratic Party in a blaze of grievance. She's now installed atop U.S. intelligence, where she reports directly to the president, who once called the FBI the enemy of the people. And she's not just parroting Trump's lines, she's retrofitting intelligence policy to match them. In short, the fox isn't guarding the hen house. The fox runs the hen house now. Now let's talk about the thing that everyone seems to be glossing over. Russia did interfere in the 2016 election. That is not a partisan opinion. That is the conclusion of the CIA, NSA, FBI, and even, perhaps most importantly for this argument, the Republican-led Senate Intelligence Committee. Some of the facts that came out of that: Russian hackers stole emails from the DNC and John Podesta. They used social media bots to sow racial, political, and social division. They tried to breach voter systems in multiple states. Unsuccessfully, thank God. But the attempt was real. And the Trump world, they were swimming in shady contacts. Paul Manafort shared polling data with Russian intelligence assets. Michael Flynn lied about secret talks with the Russian ambassador. And Roger Stone coordinated with WikiLeaks and then bragged about it. So let's ask the simple question. If the Obama administration hadn't investigated those connections, wouldn't that have been a dereliction of duty? But in 2025, the new narrative is Obama spied on Trump. The deep state conspired. The FBI was corrupt. It's funny how people screaming law and order are the first to demand we ignore actual laws and actual evidence when it makes Donald Trump or others on their side look bad. Here's why this isn't just political theater. When you put someone like Tulsi Gabbard in charge of national intelligence and she uses that power to attack past administrations and defend the current one, you've crossed a line between oversight and propaganda. Propaganda, which is a subject we're going to discuss a little bit later in this episode. Intelligence agencies are supposed to serve the country, not the president's political ambitions. But right now, we have a president under ethical fire, a DNI spreading partisan narratives, and a justice system that seems increasingly hesitant to hold the powerful accountable. The Epstein files should be a nonpartisan issue. No matter who's on the list, Americans deserve transparency. And as I've said in the past, I am in full support of anyone on that list, if there is such a list, anyone associated with the horrible acts that Epstein was involved with, whether they are Democrat, Republican, whatever, being held accountable. But instead of answers, we're getting distraction. Rewriting the Russian investigation is just the latest in a long line of authoritarian deflections. Today it's Obama, tomorrow it'll be Biden, or Hillary, or globalists. When facts don't matter, enemies are easy to invent and reinvent. History doesn't just repeat, sometimes it's repackaged. And right now, Tulsi Gabbard is the shrink-wrapped messenger for a movement that wants you to forget what actually went on in 2016. They continue to refer to it as the Russia hoax, which is at best a disingenuous way to describe the Russian influence investigation. They want you to believe the problem was the investigation, not the attempted foreign attack on our democracy. They want you to believe that public servants were traitors, that people like Paul Manafort and Roger Stone were patriots. But forgetting really isn't an option. Not now. Not with democracy under the pressure it's under these days. Not with institutions being hollowed out from the inside. We don't need to relitigate the past, but we need to remember it. So imagine telling your child, you can't go to daycare this week, Billy, because measles is back. Not COVID, not bird flu. The thing you get vaccinated for in elementary school with a sticker and a lollipop. Now imagine the Secretary of Health says, we shouldn't panic. People deserve the freedom to make their own health decisions. And now imagine the Secretary is RFK Jr. Of course, you know this is not fiction. This is real. Let's start with the numbers. As of the time of this recording, 1,497 confirmed cases of measles across 41 states. 6 deaths, 4 of them children. Nearly 23,000 students unable to attend school due to local quarantine or lack of vaccination. And in some areas, vaccination rates have dropped below 80%, the threshold at which herd immunity collapses. This isn't just bad. This is historically bad. You have to go back to like 1989 to 91 to find a comparable number that matches this. That outbreak ended with a massive federal immunization campaign. This time, we're getting Facebook Live videos from RFK talking about vaccine freedom. Now, this past Wednesday, Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer had a press conference that wasn't just angry, it was urgent. Standing in front of a CDC outbreak map that looks like someone dropped red ink across a school atlas, Schumer declared, "This is not just a failure of leadership. This is a public health emergency, and the American people deserve better than being guinea pigs in the administration's science denial experiment." He called on Congress to pass emergency funding, $4.2 billion for immunization programs, CDC staffing, and state-level outbreak response teams. He also introduced a resolution, largely symbolic but loud, that condemns Health Secretary RFK Jr. for, quote, deliberate abdication of duty in the face of a preventable epidemic, end quote. But as you all remember, we are in an era with a Republican majority in both houses, so Republicans predictably balked. Senator Josh Hawley called it theater. J.D. Vance said the real emergency is government overreach, because apparently in today's GOP, the only shots they support are metaphorical. And then we have Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. His response? Quote, "This administration trusts the American people to make informed health choices. We do not believe in mandating compliance through fear," end quote. No mention of the rising death toll. No word on school closures, canceled summer camps, or ICU beds filling up in children's hospitals. Just more language lifted straight from the libertarian Substack industrial complex. RFK Jr. also went on Steve Bannon's podcast, yes, really, and said the CDC had become too comfortable in its old thinking and needed radical transformation. Let's pause and say this plainly, just so we're all on the same page. There is nothing radical about preventing children from dying of preventable diseases. Hard stop. And this isn't just a domestic issue anymore. On Friday, the European Center for Disease Prevention and Control issued a formal Level 2 travel advisory for U.S. destinations, reporting high measles transmission. Canada is considering screening unvaccinated travelers from the U.S. at its airports. Australia's health minister issued a blistering statement. Quote, "The United States is flirting with epidemiological disaster and exporting public health uncertainty around the globe," end quote. Meanwhile, WHO officials are reportedly alarmed at how quickly misinformation is being amplified by the U.S. government's official channels, especially since RFK has appointed a known anti-vaccine influencers to advisory roles at HHS. The ripple effects are real. In Kenya, Nigeria, Colombia, where trust in Western medicine is already fragile, the American anti-vax pivot is being used by local extremists to further undermine immunization campaigns. We're not just poisoning our own well, we're spraying it globally. Meanwhile, back home, state and local health departments are pleading for help. Here's what's happening. California's Department of Public Health requested emergency vaccine shipments for underserved communities. The request was denied due to, quote, federal budget realignment, end quote. Florida, predictably, has stopped publicly tracking vaccine preventable disease data under the DeSantis doctrine of, quote, freedom, end quote. Because I suppose when you finally reach the point where you can't twist the bad news into good news anymore, you'll just stop reporting on it altogether. In Missouri, the entire state immunization database went down last week for, quote, system maintenance. Some health experts fear the outage wasn't accidental. The Biden-era vaccine for children program, gutted. The National Vaccine Injury Compensation Program, defunded. And HHS has quietly paused enforcement of school vaccination standards, citing, quote, the rights of parents to determine health outcomes, end quote. This, just to be blunt, this is public health anarchy. So, getting back to Schumer, what is his endgame? Beyond the emergency resolution, he's mobilizing a coalition of governors, mostly Democrats, of course, but a few uneasy Republicans as well, to create an interstate health compact. The goal, share data, pool vaccine reserves, and bypass federal gridlock. Think of it sort of like a shadow CDC. So yes, 6 months into this administration, and we already have states who are trying to not just deal with the shortcomings of the federal government, but to work around the active interference by the federal government. Schumer's also pushing for legislation to restore funding to the CDC's Immunization and Respiratory Disease Division, funding that was slashed by nearly 50% this past spring under RFK Jr.'s streamlining initiative. Will any of it pass a MAGA-led House and a Trump White House? Probably not. But that's not really the point. Schumer is drawing a red line in public, framing the crisis as not just medical, but moral. And the message is clear. When the federal government abandons science, the states and the people have to step up. Measles isn't new. It isn't complex. It's the canary in the coal mine. A test of how much disinformation, sabotage, and political cowardice we can endure before bodies start to pile up. And folks, we are failing the test. This isn't about vaccine hesitancy anymore. It's about leadership or lack thereof. It's about whether the U.S. is still capable of acting like a modern functioning democracy when faced with a 19th century virus and a 21st century misinformation machine. Chuck Schumer's declaring an emergency. As for the rest of us, we need to declare one too. At the ballot box, in our school board meetings, in the way we fight for actual facts, in a world drowning in nonsense. One particularly good sign that a cultural moment is happening is when Fox News does something like referring to Superman as super woke. Kellyanne Conway accuses Hollywood of ideology spiking my popcorn, and former TV Superman Dean Cain asks, how woke is Hollywood going to make this character? Meanwhile, the film has soared to the highest opening weekend of any solo Superman, $123 million domestically. So, is Superman woke? Is it actually new? Or is it literally who he's always been? Now, director James Gunn framed the film very bluntly. Superman is the story of America, an immigrant that came from other places and populated the country. Basic human kindness is a value and something we've lost. In the film, Lex Luthor hurls the slur alien at Superman, an echo of the real-world phrase illegal alien. Superman's reply, I'm as human as anyone. I screw up all the time. That's being human, and that's my greatest strength. Critics on the right seize on that. Fox News called it super woke. Greg Gutfield said Gunn had built a woke shield. Kellyanne Conway bleated, we don't go to the movie theater to be lectured to. And Dean Cain, who played the Man of Steel in the New Adventures of Lois and Clark, a television show that went off the air in 1997 and hasn't been seen much since. Well, Cain warned the script strays away from, quote, truth, justice, and the American way, end quote. What a bunch of bullshit. Now, within the film are scenes, some geopolitical debate, pro-immigrant framing, a hero who refuses to kill and chooses kindness, that conservatives see as political messaging, not mythic escapism. But here's the twist. Superman has always been woke. His creators, Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, Jewish sons of immigrants, built him as a warrior for social justice. In 1946, he took it to the Ku Klux Klan in Superman Smashes the Klan, weakening the Klan in real life. In the 1950s, Superman delivered anti-racism PSAs in schools. In Action Comics #1, he rescued a woman from domestic abuse. In more recent comics, he stopped white supremacists from blaming undocumented workers for job loss. He's defended the marginalized since day one. Grant Morrison, writer of All-Star Superman, traces that tradition. Superman started as a socialist icon fighting oppression. Over decades, he morphed into a Cold War patriotic hero, a cosmic adventurer, a modern morality figure, and now returns to those roots. But all this arguing brings us back to the essential core of this problem. Being woke is good, and the right hates it. Being woke in this context means being conscious of injustice, inclusion, fairness, empathy. These have always been core superhero values. But to many conservatives, woke signals a politicization of culture, a leftist ideological pitch where once there was escapism. Nicholas Grossman summed it up. Each part of Gunn's quote embodies the opposite of what MAGA stands for: kindness, immigration, empathy. Not part of the current right's brand. At the same time, audiences are telling a different story. As GBH's Angela Beener noted, the message resonates, and the outraged pundits are increasingly a niche minority. In that sense, Superman's current film is less ideological propaganda and more a reawakening of his foundational principles. So, why all the outrage? The right's hysteria here is part of a larger culture battle, accusing every new progressive pop culture icon of woke indoctrination. It's a signal. Run away from it. And a test. Are you with us or them? But that strategy doesn't match the box office. The movie rolled out internationally, with many praising its emotional depth, even as red state pundits bleated, "Go woke, go broke." Spoiler alert, it didn't. President Trump's team even memeified it, a digitally altered poster casting Trump as Superman, bleh, trying to appropriate the power while denying the values. Superman's arc right now is a lens into our broader cultural moment. Immigrant heroism at a time of immigration fear. Kindness as radical power, not weakness. Resistance to extremist messaging from inside media. A reminder that heroism belongs to all, not just a single political identity. So yeah, the right can complain about an alien advocating for immigrant empathy, but the point is, Superman was designed for that role. He's politics-proof, until politics finds him again. So, is Superman woke? Yes, and he's always been. In 2025, Hollywood reminds us again, waiting for the hero to arrive isn't enough. The hero is what makes us arrive. All right, without any further ado, let's jump into this week's deep dive, which is titled Authoritarian Creep: How Freedom of the Press is Being Eroded. Let's start with the phrase that got applause lines at rallies and death threats in reporters' inboxes and made every authoritarian in the world sit up and say, "Hey, we can work with this guy." The line is, quote, "The press is the enemy of the people, end quote. In 2025, it's easy to forget how radical that sounded the first time around. It's now practically a mission statement. Not official, of course. That would be un-American. Instead, it's repeated by mouthpieces, amplified online, and turned into bumper stickers and t-shirts by the MAGA merch machine. But the effects? They are anything but subtle. In the past 6 months alone, we've seen the following. Department of Justice subpoenas targeting reporters for covering internal leaks and protests. Arrests of photojournalists at immigration detention centers and on the southern border. And increased rhetoric equating dissenting media with treason. It's not yet Soviet-style gulag, but don't tell yourself it can't go there. The erosion is already in motion. So let's talk a little bit about some of the actual viable criticisms of journalism these days. And that would be this whole concept of bias and fake news. And let's clear something up that too many people still confuse. Bias is not the same as fake news. So let me tell you what I'm talking about. Let's say the New York Times reports on a new immigration policy, and they focus on the humanitarian impact. That's bias. Fox News might focus on border crime or crime in general. That is also bias. But fake news is when you make stuff up. It's when you say things that are provably false, know they're false, and keep saying them anyway. Now, that whole fake news thing, that phrase, fake news, has been one of the top phrases since the 2016 presidential campaign, and I think we know who's responsible for its proliferation. Now, back to reality. If you need a case study in this difference between bias and fake news, look no further than Fox News, and specifically Dominion Voting Systems versus Fox News. You remember that back in 2023? Fox settled for $787 million. Why did they settle? Because they knowingly aired lies about Dominion's role in rigging the 2020 election. Even after internal emails showed that hosts and producers knew the information they were giving was not true. Bias means you emphasize certain facts. Fake news means you abandon them. That distinction matters because when people can't tell the difference, they tune out everything. And when that happens, the loudest voice wins, not the truest one. Okay, but now here's where it stops being abstract. In May of this year, the Washington Post revealed that one of its national security reporters had been under surveillance, emails, phone records, and yes, location data. The DOJ said it was investigating a leak, but it declined to say what or why the surveillance lasted nearly 4 months. Over at ProPublica, 2 investigative reporters covering fossil fuel subsidies were subpoenaed in June for their communications with government whistleblowers. In Texas, a freelancer embedded with the immigration activists was arrested and her equipment seized, all without a warrant. She was held for 13 hours. No charges filed, just questions. And this is not paranoia. It's swiftly becoming policy. And it sends a very clear message. If you make power uncomfortable, power will make you uncomfortable right back. Now, when you bring social media into the equation, a messy thing gets so much more messy. Let's take a walk through your social media feed, or maybe let's not, because odds are good it's a swamp. Rage bait, conspiracy theories, amateur CIA analyst named @PatriotDad1776. Here's the problem. You're not just being shouted out by other people. You're being shouted out by bots. A lot of them. On X, of course, formerly Twitter, estimates as of this month suggest that more than 35% of political content is generated or boosted by bots. Automated accounts designed to imitate real users and manipulate public opinion. Threads, Meta's Twitter alternative, has seen a rise in shadow bots that repost narratives across multiple accounts, making fringe ideas look mainstream. So, how do bots work? They're automated, they're networked, and they're fast. One person in St. Petersburg or Bakersfield, just as a hypothetical, can create 200 accounts that all repost the same phrase within seconds. That triggers the algorithm, because the algorithm isn't checking if it's true, they're checking if it's popular. And once it's popular, it spreads. Bots can fake consensus, they can drown out real voices, they can make it harder to tell what's real and what's orchestrated. This is the digital version of shouting fire in a crowded theater. Only now the fire is fake, but the panic is real. Now, as I pointed out earlier, there is a difference between bias and fake news. And bias, generally speaking, is a lot less damaging than outright fake news. But even bias can be taken too far. Even bias can be orchestrated and weaponized. Case in point, Fox News. And remember when Fox News was just considered right-leaning? Those were the days. Now, a better way to describe Fox News would be state-adjacent. Since January, more than a dozen former Fox producers, legal analysts, and on-air contributors have joined Trump's administration, including in communications roles at the State Department, the DOJ, and Homeland Security. In return, Fox gets near total access and exclusive leaks. It's not journalism, it's synergy. And while Fox leans in, independent outlets lean out, not by choice, but by survival instinct. Fewer interviews, more blacklists, more credentialing challenges at the White House briefings. You're watching a soft purge of dissenting voices from the national stage. You don't need to shut them down. You just need to cut their mic. And here's something that should chill you. What's happening here has happened elsewhere. In Hungary, Viktor Orban didn't ban the press. He just bought it, turned it into a megaphone. In Russia, Vladimir Putin didn't always arrest reporters. First, he discredited them, called them corrupt, elitist, liars. In Turkey, Erdogan reconstructed media licensing rules, letting his allies buy up broadcast infrastructure. In all those cases, the public didn't resist. They shrugged. They said, well, the media is biased anyway. Sound familiar? We're not just flirting with authoritarian tactics. We're copying them, line by line. And let's get something straight. You don't have to like journalists. You don't have to agree with what they write. But if you think a free press is optional, you've missed the point of democracy. When the press can't do its job, you can't do yours as a citizen. You don't know what's happening inside your government. You don't know who's breaking the law. You don't know who's suffering or why or what needs to change. And without that knowledge, your vote becomes theater. Freedom of the press is not a luxury. It is infrastructure Without it, democracy is a facade propped up by slogans and silence. So what can you do? You want a happy ending? Well, here's maybe not a happy ending, but a practical one. Support independent journalism. Pay for it. Subscribe. Call out misinformation when you see it, especially when it comes from someone you agree with. That's the big one. Teach your friends and family the differences between bias and fabrication. It's not a high school debate. It's the difference between critical thinking and cult thinking. Be a slow consumer. Don't repost until you've read the article. Don't react to screenshots. And most importantly, cite your source. I don't listen to any argument with any real attention online unless it's got a source. And you'd be shocked at how many of them don't. Most importantly, stay awake. Stay noisy. They want you numb and distracted. Don't give them the satisfaction. Now, I, for one, still believe that light is the best disinfectant, even if it's only shining through a crack in the door. Freedom of press is something that both sides of the political spectrum should care about. Whether you're on the left or the right or wherever, you don't need to agree with the piece of journalism in order for you to want it to be protected, because protecting the one you don't agree with protects the one you do agree with. And so, faithful listeners, so ends the rant for this week's episode. As always, I want to thank you for taking the time to download this episode and listen to what I have to say. I would love to hear from you. You can reach out to the podcast using any of our social media platforms. The links to those are on our Linktree page, and the Linktree URL is in the description of this episode. If you stop and see us on social media, give us a follow. You can then be privy to the posts that are made on behalf of the podcast. You can also reach out to us via email at neighborotleftpodcast@gmail.com. I want to hear your thoughts on the podcasts. I want to hear both the good and the bad. I'm interested in feedback all across the board. I'm also interested in hearing any ideas you might have for subjects that you'd like to hear about on the podcast. But most of all, I just want to hear from my listeners. So please do me a solid and reach out in one of those many ways. So Neighbor on the Left will be back on Friday with another installment of Back Porch Files, and then another full episode on the Tuesday of next week. So until then, stay loud, stay kind, and as always, have the week you voted for.